everyone, welcome to the studio. Today we are going to paint a bird as promised. Now I know last month I talked about the Terry Ludwig Snowbird set that was sold for a limited time, and I know that a bunch of you jumped on that and purchased the set and have requested that I do a demo exclusively with the set. So since it was curated, that's the word I'm looking for, by artist Mike Beeman, and I'm going to put a link to his website so that you can look him up. He chose the pastels for the set, and he is very well known for his bird paintings, beautiful, expressive bird paintings. So while it's called the Snowbird set, it's not limited to just painting birds. I've used it for landscapes. But I thought it'd be fun, let's paint birds, because there is a lot we can learn from painting a bird. And so some of you I know are probably thinking, I'm not even going to watch this demo because I'm not interested in painting a bird. But I urge you to stick with me, because painting birds was actually one of the first things that I painted. In fact, now that I think about it, and I don't have this painting anymore, I don't know what happened to it, but the very first painting I did in my first pastel class was an osprey. It was a bird. And so for me, I really enjoyed it. I painted birds way more than I do now. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about value. I learned a lot about color. So there's a lot we can learn with birds. So stick with me, because what you can learn, you can then apply to the subjects that you really would rather paint. So come on closer and we'll have a look at the Snowbird set, and I'll put a picture of the set. And what I really want to say about doing this demo and using this set is that you don't have to have the set to paint along, or to try out the demo, or to paint a bird. Simply looking at the set to see that it has some colorful darks, right? So we have a dark green, this is another dark duller green, a dark purple, I think that's a blue. So we've got some colorful darks, some dark reds. We've got some colorful lights. So we have a pale pink, a pale yellow, pale blue, pale, I guess that's a yellow, kind of greenish. Here's another dull blue. Here's a pale yellow, a peach. Here's another kind of dull green. And that is really important, that you have some colorful lights, some colorful darks, some bright, intense colors, and some duller or neutral colors. This by no means is a comprehensive set. More than likely, to paint anything, I would have to probably supplement with other pastels. But I'm going to do my best for today's demo to just use this set. I probably will introduce some hard pastels as we go on. But what I wanted to say is, if you don't have this set, just look at the colors in this set and see what you have that would be comparable in the pastels that you do own. And if you don't own these types of colors, this is something that you need to make a list and say, gee, I really need more colorful darks, or I really need more colorful lights, or I need more dull neutrals. That can be helpful. Alright, so the first thing that I'm going to do, let's talk about the paper I'm using. This is 6 by 8. I'm only going to work small. When I used to paint birds a lot, I would just do, say, 5 by 7, just quick studies. And I wouldn't do any prep, I wouldn't do a thumbnail, I would just kind of respond to the reference photo I was using. And one of my preferred papers for painting birds or animals is Sennelier LaCarte paper, which is a vegetable fiber surface that is sanded. And I just really like the soft feel and the way it accepts pastel. This piece of paper, though, is not Sennelier. Instead, it's by Schminke, and it's called Sansfix, and to the best of my knowledge, it's no longer produced, but it came with some set that I bought at some time, so it's been in my collection. But it feels very, very similar to the Sennelier, so that's why I'm going to use it. But I really like LaCarte paper for doing birds or animals. But the one thing about LaCarte, and I'm assuming that it's going to be this as well, is it cannot get wet. So we're not going to do any kind of wet underpainting. So the first thing that I do, I think this is going to show up, yeah. The first thing that I'm going to do is very lightly draw in my bird. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the bird, because if I do this very precise drawing, then chances are I will feel like I'm coloring it in. It'll become too precious. But on the other hand, if I have a very loose drawing, I can be more painterly. The one thing that I do is I want to say, where is his beak going to end? I need to know that. And where do I want him to, where do I want the bottom or his feet to be? I don't want anything to be too close to the edge, and I don't want it to be right in the middle. So if I have his beak lined up right here, he still has some room where he looks out. If he was too close to the edge, it would feel awkward. The first thing that I do is I basically eyeball everything, right? So I'm not measuring or doing anything like that. I'm just simply responding and doing a quick sketch. And then if it doesn't look right or feel right, I'll go back and do some measuring. So I trust my judgment first. I don't mind that his tail is going off the paper. Let's see. So, okay, that seems about right. So if that was right, then we would have his little eye right in here. Well, by the way, I'm using a pastel pencil to do this light drawing. Oh, another thing about the paper is if you press too hard on it, it will dent. You'll get indentations. So it's kind of a delicate paper, but I like it. You just have to understand its idiosyncrasies. All right, so there's the little bird. Now we have his little foot, and it's on this branch. Now let's talk about the background before we get too far into the painting itself. This boring background, right, in the photo. So I want to make this a winter bird, and so I'm going to just add a few touches of some distant branches and some berries. You'll see. So I'm just going to kind of scribble in some branches so that I know that I can just kind of create some suggested background, which we'll get to. Okay, the next thing that I do is I start by blocking in the values, starting with the darkest values. So what I'll do is I'll choose a dark value color from the set. Let's start with the dark blue. And I'll squint at my bird, and when I squint, everything gets fuzzy, and I see that it's really dark right around his cap. The black cap chickadee. So I'm going to use the side of the soft pastel here, this Terry Ludwig. Also his beak is dark. And lightly block in where I see dark. Where else is it dark? There's a little bit of dark on his wing and on his tail. So I say, where else is it dark? His foot is dark, where it comes around the branch. What else is dark? The branch. So in other words, I'm not going to wait until I'm done with the bird to worry about the background or to address the background. I'm going to address the background as I paint the bird. So I'm going to use the dark to lightly suggest some branches in the distance, like so. So that's the first layer of dark, but if you know, the way I like to paint is I like to layer several layers of a dark value to make excuse me, to make it more interesting. So I just selected another dark, which happens to be a dark brown. It really doesn't even matter what color. That's why I'm using this set, but I'm actually paying attention to the value and not so much the local color of the bird. So it could be brown, it could be purple. So that's 2 layers. Let's go for a 3rd layer. Let's go for the dark green. And again, I'm going to lightly layer this dark green wherever I see the dark value. This is the way I paint all animals, by the way, and this is how I learned how, oops, I don't want that mark right there. This is how I learned how to make more interesting color and not just be so tied to the local color. I'm going to add a little bit of red violet. Why? Because it's in the set and it's close in value to what I already have. Alright, so the next thing that I'm going to do before I move on to the lighter areas is I'm going to ask myself, is there anywhere that is what I want to call a super dark, meaning darker than the dark that I already put down? Well, if I look at his black cap chickadee, I see that actually it's darker than I have it. So what I'm going to do is not in the set, but it's a little piece of that Terry Ludwig eggplant, which you can see I need to order another one, right? It's V100 is the number of it, and it is a really, really rich dark. I call it a super dark. And I'm only going to put it in those areas where it is darker than the surrounding darks. I could actually use black for this if I didn't have this. Where else is it super dark? Right under his body on his foot, and maybe just a little bit on the branch. I actually do have a black hard pastel, and I'm going to come in and add just a touch of the black, and just to kind of separate his little feathers on his wings and on his foot and on his beak. Now, there's something that I need to do, because if I don't do it now, it's going to kind of drive me crazy just a little bit, and that is I want to paint his eye, because if I don't bring him to life by painting his eye, it's like this kind of a, you know, like a horror movie, that blank stare, like the dolls that are like freaky looking. So I want to bring this little guy to life and paint his eye. So I used a little rust color and a little bit of brown, and now I'm going to add that little highlight with a little bit of blue, because actually that highlight is coming from the sky. Here's a little bit of, when you're working small, you've got to be delicate here. So there's his eye. So now he kind of has a little bit more life to him. It's easier to look at him. Can add a little bit of light to his beak right there. Alright, so we've got all the darks in place. Now, 2 ways I can go with this. I can go in and block in the light areas right now, and sometimes I do that. Like, so sometimes I'll go in and put in where I think it's going to be light. But sometimes I'll wait until the end. Let's just block in where we think it's going to be the lightest, and knowing that we'll come back to this area. It will just kind of give us a kind of a guidepost as to how light we're going to get this bird. So if I squint at it again, I can see where it's lightest. And again up in his wings, right here on the edge. And we'll come back to it and we'll make it a little bit more interesting. So now that I know where the lightest lights are, I have the darkest darks, lightest lights, and everywhere else is a middle value of some sort. And I'm going to look, this is where he's starting to, we can start to see, excuse me, some color in his feathers. Kind of gray with a little bit of rusty color. And I'm not sure I have the right gray in this set. So we're gonna work with it. We're gonna do the best we can with what we have. I know some of you have been using this set to paint some birds and have been supplementing a little bit with some other colors, and that's fine. I don't think necessarily that this was a limited number of pastels. It's not that it's meant to be able to paint everything completely. So I'm using the colors that I have now. Before I get too far though, I really need to start to address the background. Because we don't want to wait too long before we get to the background. I usually get about this far and say, okay, now what I put in the bird, I'm going to start to put in the background as well. As I look at this, I see that there's quite a bit of a feeling of green, and green will help me get that grayness, right? And that might make an interesting color for our background. So one of the ways that I like to treat a background is to say, okay, what color do I have in the bird? I'm going to pull that color and use it in the background as well. And that, remember we talk about that earth-sky connection. I'm going to add a little bit of light to the branch. But we talk about the earth-sky connection, that we want what's happening in the sky to relate to what's happening on the ground. Well, it's the same thing when we paint an animal. We want what's happening on the animal to have some sort of relationship to the colors in the actual animal. And that will help you have a little bit more interest in color harmony. We're going to make this a snowy day, which I think will be fun to do. Oops. I'm going to use these light, dull colors in the background. I used this in the background, but I haven't yet used this color in the bird. This is kind of a nice gray-green. So let's throw a little bit of that in our bird. Get these little feathers. It's kind of a fun color. Okay. What else do we see in the bird? I see a lot of kind of a rusty orange. This might be a little, actually that might work. This color I was thinking would be a little bit too bright and intense, but it actually, I don't know if it's the result of the paper. It's not as bright and bold as I thought it might be, so I think that actually works. I can lighten it a little bit with a pale yellow. Alright, we are at the point where I need to put a little bit more in the background. Let's continue with this green. And then we can adjust it if we need to. I think I want to hint at a few more branches. And I'm going to add a little bit more brown to our perch. And I'll throw a little bit into our bird. And let's hit at a few more branches coming down. I'm going to add some berries, I think. All right, so now we want to pull this bird out from the background a little bit more. So we got to do two things. One thing is we have to refine the feathers. So I want to refine his cap, and I'm using that black new pastel, and I'm trying to get the shape of his head, and I don't quite, I'm looking at the photo. This is one time where I actually have to pay attention to my reference photo. You know, when I paint a landscape, a lot of times we just, you know, we can paint a tree however we want just to make it work, but when we're painting an animal or a bird or a portrait, we actually do have to pay more attention to our subject. Now I can come in and brighten our lights. So where does the light part of this guy go? And then right under here, I'm pressing a little bit harder because I want it to stand out. And he's got a little bit of glow underneath his fluffy feathers, right underneath. And there's some white on his tail feathers and a little bit on his wing. Let's add a little bit of pale blue to the light, especially where it's kind of where the really bright light comes together. One of the things that I like about this paper is it just has a really soft feeling, the way it accepts the pastel, and I really like that effect. One thing that's happening in this area here is the value of the background is the same as the value in the bird. So look at, we have is a lost edge. Remember we talked about lost and found edges? It's lost. So there's two ways we can go about it. We can darken the background or we can darken the bird. Let's see if we darken the bird first to see if that helps. Because we want to get a harder edge right in there. And that helps. Make it green. There we go. So now we just found that edge again. So that kind of creeped up on me, but those are the things that you have to look out for. All right, so we've got our bird pretty well. Let's work a little bit more on the background, and then that'll tell us just how much more we need to do on our bird. All right, so what if we were to put little hints of some of these kind of red-violet berries? Remember we added a little bit of red-violet into our bird? Let's add just a little bit more of that back. This one's a little bit too bright. So then we'll come back and just add a few other little branches. We could use another berry right in here. So what I'm doing is I'm making this up, this background, but I am mindful of how it relates to our little bird. I think we could give him a little bit more of a highlight in his eye. Oops, that's too big. What happens if it's too big? I'm going to take my push pin, remember I use this a lot, and remove some of that pastel. I can get a much more control with the pin than if I tried to brush it out. This little beak needs to be upturned a little bit more. So these are the things that I'm working on at the very end of the painting. It's just kind of looking and refining the shape and the edges, trying to create a little bit of feeling of the feathers. Okay. I'm going to stop now because, again, as you know, this is always a good time to stop and evaluate and see where you're at with your painting. But I would say that I'm 99% done. I might just do a little bit more refining. Of course, I'll post the finished picture. But the whole idea is you want to build up your layers by value. So block in your darks, show where your lights are, and then start building the layers. Do not wait till the end of the painting to think about what you're going to do in the background. Instead, work on it at the same time as you work on your bird. So I hope you've learned some things about painting birds. And it was fun to play with this set. I think I could have used a few more of the grays, but overall I had what I needed. So it was a lot of fun. And I'll do another one, and I'm going to try to do it as a step-by-step demo. So we'll have, and I'm sharing a lot more bird demos this month as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I will see you next time.